silence, please. All rise.
Good afternoon, everyone, and to those who are in the room, can I welcome you to the historic main courtroom of the Supreme Court of Ireland, which has been the seat of the Supreme Court and the place of its hearings since the court's return to the Four Courts in 1932. Can I also welcome those who are attending this ceremony remotely. Today is the first day on which that has been possible. I appreciate that many who are attending remotely might much prefer to be in the room today, but the difficulties with which we're all familiar have led to a situation where that's just not been possible. I was determined that anyone who wished to have a physical call in the courtroom would have that opportunity, and the numbers were such, and the time frame within which all of the calls could be conducted were such that it was not possible to arrange for a situation where guests could be present, so that there could be a sufficient number in each batch who was to be called to allow the entire call to take place physically within the time available. But hopefully those who are able to participate remotely will not find it too different to the ceremony that might more traditionally have been carried out. And so far as those in the room are concerned, the ceremony is the same as it always was, and I suspect will be for the foreseeable future. This is a short formal ceremony, but it is one of great significance. The call to the bar signals an important step in the life of each graduate, and it may well, in many cases, mark the first step towards practice at the bar, which is a challenging and demanding profession, but one which has the potential to provide a very satisfying career. Today you join a profession with a long history, but one which is also, in my view, of considerable contemporary importance. And membership of the profession brings with it a duty to promote and uphold the rule of law. John Philpot Curran was an inspirational Irish barrister of over 200 years ago, but a speech of his in 1790 is the root of the famous quotation that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And I think those words summarise the raison d'etre of a legal profession in a democratic society and the work which lies ahead of each barrister in defending liberty and promoting the rule of law. I mentioned earlier that the bar remains, in my view, a profession of considerable importance in contemporary Ireland. The existence of an independent legal profession to put forward the cases of litigants before the courts is a vital part of our system, and the role of an independent judiciary in maintaining the rule of law would be significantly impaired and reduced if that independent judiciary did not have available to it a truly independent legal profession prepared to undertake difficult and sometimes unpopular cases in a way that allows the judge or jury, as the case may be, to have all the facts and all the arguments available so as to come to a just conclusion in accordance with law. And in that context, it's vital that you maintain a thorough knowledge of the law, not just for the purposes of advising clients, but also complying with your duty to assist the court in ensuring that the law is properly applied. I think the fact that you are all here today shows that you have demonstrated a thorough knowledge of the law. But we live in a constantly changing and evolving legal framework, and in that context it's vital that everyone renews and extends that knowledge as their practice develops. But it's also of great importance that you adhere to the highest ethical standards. Our court system is dependent on judges being able to trust counsel. Once lost, that trust is very hard to restore, and it is also important to remember that the perception of the profession of barrister among the public generally is highly dependent on the experience which individuals, be they clients or others, have in their individual encounters with members of the bar. As barristers, your first obligation is, of course, to your own client, to be courageous but also courteous in the way in which you advance that client's case, but also equally importantly that that is done within the bounds of the rules of ethics and your important duties to the court. With that being said, I'll now call each graduate individually to the Bar of Ireland. Dawn Lonergan. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Suzanne Scott. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Emer O'Brien. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Niall McAneny. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Michael Nutley. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Sylvia Maria Crowley. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Jennifer Roach. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Mark McMahon. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Jason Murray. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Andrew Corrigan. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Now, each of our graduates, having now been called to the Bar of Ireland, are now barristers, and as barristers they're entitled to practice in all of the Courts of Ireland, including in this Supreme Court. And to illustrate that new status, I will ask each newly called member of the Bar whether they wish to move anything before the Court this afternoon. Ms. Lonergan, do you move anything? Ms. Scott, do you move anything? Ms. O'Brien, do you move anything? Mr. McAneny, do you move anything? Mr. Nutley, do you move anything? Ms. Crowley, do you move anything? Ms. Roach, do you move anything? Mr. McMahon, do you move anything? Mr. Murray, do you move anything? Mr. Corrigan, do you move anything? And that concludes this short, formal and important ceremony of call to the Bar of Ireland. It only remains for me on my own behalf, but also on behalf of all of the other judges of the Supreme Court who in more normal times will be here in some numbers with me on the bench, to congratulate each and every one of you and to wish you every happiness and success in the future.
All right.